Welcome to Peter and Ruffy's Football Show here on STV. The main talking points on tonight's programme. Filip Senderos is paraded as a Rangers player and says he's delighted to get the opportunity to play at Ibrox. Jozo Šimanović has revealed what really happened in his failed move to Torino, and it's all-out attack to try and get to the World Cup in 2018, according to Scotland's Russell Martin. That's just a few of the topics we'll be discussing tonight. Alan Ruff is with me, Peter Martin, and I'm delighted to say our bootroom guest tonight is from 360 sports agency Raymond Sparks. Raymond, I couldn't think of a better guest the day after the madness of a transfer window. It may well have been millions and over $1 billion spent in England, but boy, has it changed days in what was spent in Scotland.
Indeed it is. I think it's a much different marketplace, a much different industry altogether up here, it seems, in Scotland than it is in England. But I suppose we can console ourselves a wee bit by knowing that it's not just Scotland that are trailing behind England. Most of the world is as well.
You'll know basically because of, mentioning the fact that Europe's reaction, the world's reaction to the deal that has created a huge imbalance between clubs in Europe who have to try and compete now with what the Premier League clubs are getting.
I mean, you only have to read all the headlines that exist online or in the football magazines, and I think there's a genuine level of concern now about what's going on in England, because even the bigger countries throughout Europe, Spain and Germany, they're very concerned that it's almost getting out of control, and that there is a danger that England could actually go so far ahead of everyone that there's going to be a tremendous imbalance,
And looking at the deals, I mean, last night it was an event in itself, just waiting to see. One club thought they had a player, I'm talking about Moussa Sissoko. Suddenly he's potentially going to Everton, and right at the death, you have a group of fans who are completely and utterly demoralised, and another set at Tottenham who are as high as a kite. Now that has been replicated to a really small extent up here in Scotland, where some people think there's an imminent signing, for example, at Celtic, doesn't materialise. Some people think a player's going out, suddenly it collapses.
Yeah, and I think that if people were looking for answers as to why those things happen, there's a variety of different stories that could be attached to them. I mean, I would happen to think that maybe in Scottish terms, if Celtic or Rangers are trying to sign a player, it could be that that's hugely dependent on a player going out the door at the same time, where the finance that is created and opens up on the back of that player leaving is the very finance they need to then actually invest in the new player that's coming in. So if it's the case that there's a breakdown at the last minute, then it could be that the money isn't there, and that you find that there's a variety of different reasons that are provided that said, we couldn't get the player, it was for personal reasons, it couldn't get the player, he failed a medical, or and the real truth might just simply be that all of a sudden it wasn't such a good idea to invest that amount of money because we didn't have it when we thought we were going to have it.
Yeah, okay, you managed to nail both halves of Glasgow with that with that line, because quite simply, Ruffy, I'm looking last night at Jozo Šimanović as it's heading towards the midnight hour. He is over in Italy. He's had a medical, suddenly he's failed a medical. Next minute you hear the personal terms have been agreed, but then again suddenly the goalposts have been moved, and I think Jozo Šimanović has said, basically he's put out a statement saying he was fit. There's no question that he was going to fail the medical, but Torino changed the details of the agreement at the last minute.
Well, I think it's exactly what Raymond's saying. There are clubs out there who think they've got $3.5 million, and all of a sudden when the crunch comes they think, well, maybe we could get him a wee bit cheaper because he's got an injury. We could give him a medical. We could say, well, we found something in the medical, and then go back to the club and say, well, maybe that, not too sure about that. Could we have him on loan? I actually saw the interview, as I told you, before I came in. He was sitting in a cafe over there and he got interviewed, and he said, look, I've had 2 medicals, I've passed both of them, I've agreed terms, I'm just waiting in the 2 clubs. So from where I'm sitting, it looks as if somebody all of a sudden has said this isn't a good deal.
Yeah, I mean, from your experience as an agent, Raymond, have you been in that extraordinary set of circumstances where you think everything's done and dusted and then there's a late twist?
Indeed there is, and there's a lot of brinkmanship that goes on of people making moves and people saying that they're going to make a move, and it's a lot of it is bluff and counter bluff. I haven't been involved in too many situations, however, where you've maybe been sitting on transfer deadline day and a deal pretty much has been done and then somebody scuppers it right at the last minute. Ruffy's right, the bottom line is that it could be a variety of different reasons. Again, I think there's an interesting thing about the Croatian who's at Celtic, and that is that he would want to actually emphasise that he's fit and he passed the medical. I kind of have long since had the feeling that he's something of damaged goods, it appears to me. And that maybe he has to, over-egg the pudding a wee bit there by making sure that people don't think he's damaged so that he can't go somewhere. Yeah. But, he hasn't played much since he got to Celtic, and I think that that's something that should be a concern for a lot of people. Yeah,
well, he hasn't, never mind concern, absolute surprise for me, Ruffy, when I heard that there was a potential move to Torino on the cards. I haven't even formed an opinion about whether he can play or not yet.
Well, I think a lot of the Celtic supporters are like that as well. They've only saw him in 6 or 7 games. Obviously he was put out there to be a £4.5 million player. We don't know if that was an inflated price either. But it certainly all accounts international level, he is a quality player. It's where do you fit him in now? What I was going to say to Raymond was, and obviously he's in the know rather than us, do you find now there's so much money going about the players now that some players are quite content to take the money rather than play?
It's very interesting. A few years back, someone that I've represented pretty much my entire career, Peter Grant, was the manager of Norwich, and I thought it was quite interesting because at that time, as the manager of Norwich, he didn't have a budget to work with, nothing to speak of. And the truth is that he was in the loan market. So I would say to him, how are you getting on with this move, that approach? And he would tell me that he said, well, I've made an approach for Jimmy Smith at Chelsea. And I'd say, I've never heard of him, Peter. He goes, yeah, he's not a bad player, and he's as much as we can afford. But he's on £400,000 a year. He's got a 3-year contract, and he doesn't want to come and play at Norwich. Now, you've really got to examine that. Is that because he goes to Norwich and he maybe finds that he's not even good enough to play for Norwich, even though he's at Chelsea? But the easier thing for Jimmy Smith to do, and this is a genuine story, is that to stay at Chelsea, pick up your money, maybe even get to the end of your contract, maybe have nowhere else left to go, but you've managed to save quite a few quid along the way, and it sets you up for the rest of your life somewhere else. So.
Well, and I'm not for a minute suggesting this is your player, and I genuinely don't know. I'll direct this question at Ruffy. That whole scenario that you're describing there is Islam for us. Because he's got 3 years at Chelsea right now. He could sit there on the money that he was given and not move. He's got that many loan deals. He's had more loan deals than I can remember for a player over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think, I don't know the boy himself, but it looks as if somebody needs to put an arm around him and actually show him where he's going in the game, because he seems to be really off the rails. He hasn't stayed any time at any of the clubs he's been at. That's obviously a problem. And I think it's actually Chelsea's problem to sort out.
I'd like to give you another example of that. A few years back, you'll remember that a player by the name of Liam Miller came through the ranks at Celtic, and there seemed to be some kind of discrepancy on his contract arrangement that allowed the back door to be opened for Man United and Alex Ferguson to come in and take him. Now, for a young boy who had barely graced the Celtic first team, I think he had a handful of games, the opportunity to go to Man United without a transfer fee meant that the amount of money that he could get in his wages and times 5 years was a life-changing experience for him. And, I would defy anybody not to actually say, well, A, it's Man United, but B, I've just become, financially successful, for the rest of my life in one move, and yet he makes the move, and yet, where is Liam Miller? Did he ever play for Man United? What happened to his career? And the sad fact is that if you, for young players listening, if you do choose the money, it can mean quite a difference to your lifestyle, but it could mean the end of your career. Yeah.
Have you said to a player, don't move, you'll get more money, don't move, try and get that 100, 150 games under your belt?
Well, no, that's the currency. I mean, if you don't have any stock, then, how are you supposed to, fire the gun with no bullets in it from an agent's point of view? And you're absolutely right. You can be enticed. It can look like somebody's offering you maybe as little as an extra £500 a week, and it appears completely attractive. But if you go into the wrong movie and you're in the wrong movie, you could have backed yourself into a cul-de-sac you can't get out of.
Yeah, if only you'd known Raymond Ruffy when you were at Partick Thistle.
Well, his wife wouldn't have been packing the bags for Man City.
you see, he was
Should have been done there. Time I get back from training.
Absolutely. Oh dear, brilliant. Listen, we'll hear more from Raymond Sparks and the ins and outs of some of the deals. We've written a list here of so many of the players that have been coming in, going out. We'll go back over some of the key moves, and we will also talk about Malta against Scotland as well. That's all coming up in the next part of the programme, and we'll get more from Raymond Sparks on some of the deals that collapsed over the course of the last 24 hours. Join us if you can after the break. Welcome back to Peter and Ruffy's Football Show. Alan Ruff is alongside me, Peter Martin. Our bookroom guest, I'm delighted to say, is a football agent. Doesn't get any better than getting an insight into some of the successful transfers and some that collapse. Raymond Sparks of 360 Sports here with us. We were talking before the break about deals that fall by the wayside. Of course, Joleon Lescott did indeed fall by the wayside, but, you know, the loss there of a deal at Rangers, suddenly Philippe Senderos moves in, gets himself a deal for a year and is absolutely delighted with it.
Yeah, and I think that the Lescott situation was an interesting one because I think we had no fewer than 3 different reasons provided as to why he didn't sign. And again, that's all about people making sure that I think that they protect their interests. You know, I read in one dispatch that it was maybe a problem with his medical. At which point the Aston Villa people immediately jump in and say, no, it's nothing to do with that, because, you know, for those of us who are old enough, you'll remember that somebody like Asa Hartford, his career was killed off. I mean, I'm going back to your time, Ruffy. But, you know, somebody who failed a medical and forever in a day was then known as the guy that had a problem with his heart, and yet he actually had a full career after that. So it can be damaging to actually say anything about a medical situation. And so hence the reason why the Aston Villa chairman, who clearly was still intent in moving the player out, might have actually saw some knots and coming off the bottom line of what he was going to get out of that deal, purely and simply because somebody had put a black mark against the guy's name. Then, of course, you hear it's personal things. It's all to do with you know, issues that are all to do with the decisions he makes for his family. And again, that's totally understandable. But you could be forgiven if you're an ordinary fan for being completely frustrated that you never really know exactly what the true story was.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, you have to dig for these things, but the upshot of it all is Lescott is a memory to the Rangers fans now because Philippe Senderos has come in, and you look back at his CV, it's impressive. Now I think he's got a situation where he's got a chance to either earn himself a longer deal at Rangers or indeed put himself back in the shop window to convince people, Ruffy, that he can play and the injuries are a thing of the past.
Yeah, I think it's the injury thing more than anything. When the story came out that he was going to sign, you dig up all the players that played with him, and every one of them to the man said, wonderful player, great player. In the end, it is if he can stay away from injuries. You know, at that age, sometimes players pick up more injuries than others, but they've certainly got a quality player. And he's a player similar to Toure at Celtic. You know, all the experience in the world. You know, the fans will take to him. He's got a great CV, and if he can play the way that we know he can, as we've saw, he'll be a great asset to Rangers. Yeah,
the great thing about it from Philippe Senderos' point of view is he'll go and play some part, I would presume, in the friendly against Linfield, which is fine at the weekend, and then his baptism of fire, I would presume, is, you know, the Old Firm game, Raymond. That's one way to throw yourself right into it.
Well, as Alan's touched on there, however, I think if you're Toure or indeed Senderos, the truth is you've been over it before. So not been over an Old Firm game before, of course, but you've played in the hurly-burly of big-time derbies in your career, so it's not like they're throwing a rookie in and they would worry about it, I'm sure. As long as both sets of legs and both of these ageing players stand by them, they'll be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, until, of course, they realise, why is everybody going nuts over a throw-in, Ruffy? Because I've never witnessed a game where people question everybody's parentage over the throw-in.
Yeah, it's even more important to win the toss of the coin. You know, if you lose that, that's a bad start. That's a right bad start.
Your career's over.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I mean, on that point again, I mean, everything seems to revolve around, and we're delighted that you could come in and give us an insight into this. I mean, there's Marvin Johnson, a guy that quite clearly Mark McGee was never going to stand in his way. He was just trying to protect Motherwell's interests and trying to get the best figure. Now, you can believe anything from 350,000 to 700,000 for Marvin Johnson going to Oxford United. The point is, because of the way Motherwell's structured now, it's a good bit of business, Raymond, because they are fan-owned. They don't have Les Hutchison to bail them out. They have to balance the books. That money could be vital to them.
Yeah, and if you talk to as many chief execs and general managers as I do, you know, they have to be prudent in their approach in terms of what their spend is, what their budget's going to be. Very few of them these days will actually take chances on the basis of maybe selling a player, because although I'd like to chalk it up a wee bit, in Scotland we are absolutely now coming out of a real slump in terms of actually providing players and being able to sell players, because for a long time we weren't doing that. But in recent times, whether it's the lad McCarthy who's gone, Snodgrass and Dorrans and just, we'll use the boy Johnston as an example, that's even before we get into all the other even higher profiles that have gone. We are at least now in a place where England regard as a good hunting ground.
Yeah.
They weren't doing that for a long time. But going back to Johnston, you know, for whatever the amount of money is, that could be the difference between Motherwell being able to stabilise themselves financially this year and not, as the case may be. So I think the writing was on the wall for me when I saw that at least I read somewhere that Marvin Johnson had requested a transfer. As soon as that happens, you've got to believe that the player and his agent know that there's something in the offing, and they have to give it that final nudge, because they wouldn't have taken that step and left themselves exposed, where if Oxford didn't come in for him, he's left playing in front of a Motherwell support that know that he really didn't want to be there.
Yeah, I always think as well, just from a journalistic point of view, Roffy, suddenly when he's put in the transfer request and suddenly Motherwell are able to box clever with two quick players coming in those final hours, they know that it's just about crossing the T's, dotting the I's. It's about then taking whatever small percentage they can to get, in this example, Luka Belic, Ryan Bowman come in. That's a couple of players that Mark McGee's able to duck and dive with, and then the bulk of the money balances the books for Motherwell.
But as Raymond will tell you, that's the things that Raymond's privy to. You know, his players moving clubs, the supporters aren't. You know, supporters only see what's down there. You know, but to be in the inner sanctum of what is actually happening on the end of telephone calls must be really, really interesting to know that these are the wee fine things that supporters don't see.
Well, as it so happened, I had two clubs that made contact with me about Marvin Johnson, and so that prompted me to call Alan Burrows to have a conversation to say, what is going on? You know, if you would like me not to be privy to your personal details, but if I can help and if I can create a situation at the last minute that maybe gives you that extra £50,000 that is not on the table from the current offers you have, then I'm happy to play my role in that if it helps you. And Alan was very open and you know, invited me to come to him with anything that might be there. But the kind of money that was being talked about for the two clubs I was speaking to, it was all getting a little bit too rich for them, and so they kind of backed off.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, just before we go, we're obviously getting ever closer to this first World Cup qualifier. You were a bit worried about the tactic last night from Gordon Strachan against Malta, but with these qualifiers, Raymond, Russell Martin says we're going to attack. We've got to grab the bull by the horns here to get to Russia in 2018, and you know, I'm all for that, but certainly not when it comes to certain countries that I think can dismantle us.
Well, as an avid viewer of the show, Peter, I heard Ruffy talking about it last night. I heard Frank McAvenny's take on it. You know, how far down have we gone that we actually need to be exercising caution against a country like Malta? For goodness sake, you know, there was a time when I was a boy that we would go into Scandinavia and we would almost bank on the points before we got there, because we knew we could go and our professionalism at the standard, the level that our players played at, was always going to be so much greater.
Yeah.
We've lost our place, I know that for sure, but surely we can still go and take on Malta with a degree of aggression and gusto. You
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. We have fallen dramatically. But of course, it's all about levels. Listen, as a boy myself, I looked, we were 1-0 up against Brazil in the heat. You know, Dave Neary's hit an absolute raker, and I thought, it's a free kick 25 yards out. Ruffy will gather that ball and then put Scotland on the attack again. But it didn't quite work out that way, Raymond. That's all I'm telling you. a certain Zico took hold of the game.
It's not done his career much.
Listen, you know? There's no such thing as bad press, Raymond, I keep telling you. So Russell Martin says attack. Good. So we'll get the win at the weekend,
Yeah, the point I was making when we were coming up against teams like that, we were playing with two sitting midfielders. You know why? You know, we've got loads of guys with ability that should be going and breaking down sides, and I'm sure we will at the weekend. I've got a lot of confidence that we'll get back on the rails again.
Yeah, just briefly, what do you think? 1-2-0, 3-0?
2-1.
2-1. There you are. Oh, how far have we dropped? Even the agent's not optimistic about our chances. Listen, Raymond, it was absolutely great for you coming in here, and hopefully we'll get you back to get some of your insight into football. I think it's a great insight, Robbie. It's something that fans just don't get the chance to hear and see.
Yeah, and I wish I'd known Raymond 25 years ago, and I maybe wouldn't be sitting here.
Yeah, absolutely.
You'd have a Manchester accent by this time.
Absolutely. It could have been the... I wish you'd known Raymond. It could have been the Peter and Macca show. Anyway, on that note, Ruffy will be back tomorrow unless Raymond represents him. So thanks to Raymond Sparks, and thanks to Ruffy as well. Good night.